Everyone says that we're currently in one of the greatest heavyweight eras that we've had for a very long time, but how would our current top 10 get on against some of the best heavyweights that we've ever seen? In this video, we're going to try and imagine what would have happened if we take some of the best heavyweights from history and put them against the heavyweights of today. Welcome to Heavyweight Madness. Hello everyone, welcome back to A Guy Called Henry. It's been a little while since I've made a video. As you know, in my last video I wasn't too well and I actually was not great at all. I had like a flu or a COVID or something, and I was just feeling awful, guys, to be honest with you. I had really bad fatigue, was really knackered, and trying to do my work as well as think about making YouTube videos was not too appealing, to truth be told. But anyway, we're back, and in this video I want to do something a little bit different because, as I've said many times on this channel, I really don't want to just do news videos for the sake of it, take small pieces of information and try and spin them into bigger stories. And, you know, from time to time I find myself tempted, oh, Michael Benson's just tweeted something about, you know, Inoue signing with Riyadh season, for example. And the thing is, guys, is that, yes, I appreciate there's a place for those kinds of videos, but I just don't find them that interesting. They're quite boring. And yeah, sure, I probably will end up doing them from time to time to fill the space because I want to make this channel really successful. And I need to be consistent to do that. But I'm always behind the scenes working to try and innovate, to try and come up with new cool stuff for this channel. So if you actually want to be a part of that process, you can jump into my Discord server. There's a link in the server. Like literally this week, I dropped the guys a message. I said, what do people want to see? What kind of things do you think would be cool? And I'm constantly trying to innovate and come up with new stuff that I can do to fill the gaps. Stuff that you want to see, stuff that's exciting, stuff that's interesting. I love the idea of doing little mini documentaries and stories. That's my background anyway. Eventually, I'd love to be a documentary maker again. So that's definitely something I'd like to incorporate into the channel. So get part of the conversation, get in the Discord server. But for today, I am trying something new and I've come up with this idea. It's something that's been done many times before on other channels. I don't think I've seen it done in boxing before. I tried to do it myself a few years back. Some old subscribers from the old days might remember when I did Ring Walk Madness, where basically I got fighters on the channel. I got them to pick, I think it was like 8 songs, and whichever song they finished on would be incorporated into the next Ring Walk. Did it with Dave Allen, did it with Carl Frampton. Unfortunately, I had too many issues with copyright strikes on the music. But today we're doing it for heavyweights. We're going to do a heavyweight tournament. I've got this bracket I'm going to put up on screen now so you can see what I'm talking about. And as we go, we're going to pit these fighters against each other. I've taken fighters from the past. I've taken fighters from the present. And this is really an opportunity for us to kind of see, in a fantasy land, we can try and use our imagination to sort of work out how good actually is this era. How far would some of these guys go in a tournament like this? And I think as we progress through this table, we'll start to see the color patterns emerging. The way I've done the colors, if I can remember correctly, is that gold is current champions, light blue is current contenders, red is former fighters of note, so guys who are not fighting anymore but were contenders or were champions but aren't, you know, of that elite legendary status, and then the black are the legends of the sport, the ones who are seen as being some of the greatest fighters of all time, some of the very best. Some of those you might want to debate. Feel free to get in the comments below and tell me if you think I've missed someone who should be a legend in there. Very up for debate and criticism here, because you know what, guys? This is pure fantasy. This is pure fun. Guys, before I get into this one, don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you're new. Don't forget to bang a like on the video. And please comment in the comment section below as we go in this video, because there's a lot to talk about here. There's a lot. It's all opinion-based, this. It's all fantasy. Some of the fights that come up might have already happened. I don't know. I don't know how this is going to go yet. I've not actually worked out the breakdown of the flow of things. But get your comments in. I want to know what you think about this. Where do you think I've been an absolute idiot? Where do you think I'm bang on? And who do you think would have won this tournament? I've completely randomized them, so I've not actually worked through this at all. I don't know who's going to win. I don't know who I think is going to win each fight until I do it. I hit a randomizer, I pull out the names. So without further ado, as I've been told it is, not further ado, let's get into it. So first up, we've got Muhammad Ali versus Joseph Parker. Now, I actually think Parker's really good, and he's on a great run of form right now. He's had those back-to-back wins against Wilder and Zhang. Two of the, well, Wilder is quite a fairly diminished fighter now, but Zhang obviously still operating right at the top of the game. And Parker's had a bit of a renaissance. He's obviously been a world champion before. He's a significant fighter, a very good fighter. And maybe he'd go further in this tournament if he wasn't being drawn against one of the absolute best of all time. I think everybody knows which way I'm going to go with this one. It's Muhammad Ali. I think the boxing skills would have been too much. The speed, the resilience. And I think he probably would have, if not pointed, he possibly could have knocked Parker out. I just think Ali was so good. Obviously, he's going to go very far in this bracket, and I wonder if he'll get to the final. And I'm going to go Muhammad Ali as the winner of our first matchup. For matchup 2, we've got Joe Frazier against Dylan White. Again, Joe Frazier, an absolute legend of the game, somebody who's obviously beaten Muhammad Ali over the years. They had their absolute wars. Dillian Whyte, somebody who's been in the mix. And just so I should caveat all of these by saying that I'm going to imagine it's their very best version in the ring. It's not just the most recent, because right now Dillian Whyte is a significantly diminished Dillian Whyte. He's had wins over Joseph Parker himself. People forget this when he was at his best. So Dillian Whyte is a decent contender, but Joe Frazier would get on the inside, and I think he'd absolutely maul Dillian Whyte and knock him out with an uppercut. So I'm going Joe Frazier in this one. Next up, Larry Holmes versus Daniel Dubois. And some of you might look at the list and go, how have you decided which fights is to put in? To be honest with you, I've just tried to draw the line somewhere in history and say we're not going to go back beyond that. Partially because I've not watched them, and partially because, well, it's just somewhere. I've got to draw the line somewhere. I can't go throughout history. I've not seen a lot of the old guys to the extent where I could say, yeah, I think they'd win. But Larry Holmes is someone I've watched a little bit of, and I've looked at his record. I don't have an innate understanding of Larry Holmes and how good he is. I know his jab was amazing. I've watched breakdown videos of the Larry Holmes jab. Everyone always talks about Larry Holmes' jab. He had really good feet. He had decent knockout power, 60-odd fights. And we've got the current heavyweight champion, the IBF heavyweight champion of the world, Daniel Dubois. He's had an unbelievable year, Daniel Dubois. And he's really starting to show that he's a very, very good heavyweight. And I think in this fight, Dubois would have too much for Holmes. I think that Holmes would outbox Dubois for large parts of the fight, but I think that Dubois would get to Holmes. Holmes was hittable. He was beatable. And I don't know if Larry Holmes beat anybody as good as Daniel Dubois. I know he has that win over Ali, but Ali was hugely diminished at that point. And I think that Dubois would get the win there. So I'm going for Daniel Dubois to beat Larry Holmes. Next up, a really interesting one. Tommy Morrison against Luis Ortiz. Not a matchup that I imagined would be thrown at me. I almost don't know what to do with it. So Tommy Morrison was a good fighter, a good combination fighter. 51 fights, 48 wins, 42 KOs is a good record. Had some notable losses on there to, who was it he lost to? Lennox Lewis, and he lost to Michael Bent, who I'm not even sure who he is. I've never watched that fight before. And he also lost to Ray Mercer. But notable wins over George Foreman, and who else did he beat? He beat Razor Ruddock. But I look at Tommy as someone who had really good power, really good combination punching, had a really sad end to his career. I believe he got really... I don't remember. There was a story about Tommy Morrison. I need to look into it. I remember watching a documentary about it a while ago and thinking it was absolutely brilliant. And I don't remember what the story was exactly, but I know he had a difficult time with his health. What was wrong with Tommy Morrison? Oh, he had HIV. That's right. So Tommy Morrison had HIV. And had a sad end to his life. He died quite young. So, yeah, but a good fighter and a decent fighter. And against Luis Ortiz, who, again, a weird fighter in the modern era. I don't know how good Luis Ortiz actually was. The only fight that he really had that was of note was against Deontay Wilder. When I say of note, I mean of a guy who was at the top, very top, was against Deontay Wilder, and he got knocked out in both of those fights, despite looking like he was winning. So, how good Ortiz was, I'm not exactly sure. He beat contenders quite well, and came unstuck against someone with a bit of punching power, so that makes you think Tommy Morrison might do okay, but Tommy Morrison, a very different fighter from Deontay Wilder. I'm going to go with Tommy Morrison here, and simply because he was a world champion, and went in there with some very good fighters. Does he have a better win on his record than Ortiz? It's hard to say. I don't know how good Luis Ortiz was. Guys, that is what I need help with. Get in the comments below. Let me know who you think would have won between Tommy Morrison and Luis Ortiz. Not that I mean, Ortiz's counterpunching could have been good, though. Look, not that I think either one of them would win this, but it's still an interesting conversation. Up next, Mike Tyson versus Ajit Kabayel. And again, we don't need to spend a long time here. Mike Tyson runs through Ajit Kabayel. Kabayel might last a few rounds. He has got quite good feet, quite good hand speed. He's quite a good technical boxer. But if we're talking about prime Mike Tyson, he runs like Kabayel like a knife through butter. And I don't feel like I need to spend long justifying that one. So we're going for Mike Tyson there to get the win. Next up, David Haye against Filip Hrgovic. What an interesting fight that would have been to watch. So I'm a massive David Haye fan. He was the guy that really, really got me into boxing. I think the first fight that I watched was Hatton against Mayweather. And I had an intrigue about boxing when I was young. But then it was David Haye and Manny Pacquiao who really cemented that for me. I remember watching Pacquiao Marquez 4 at uni, and I was shocked. But David Haye was an absolute beast in his prime, one of the only ever two-weight cruiser and heavyweight world champions. And I absolutely loved what he brought to the sport. It was a time when the heavyweight division was really, really dead, and we needed a character like him, someone to bring some life to it. And he did exactly that, and he was just such a fantastic mover, great athlete, ferocious puncher. And if his body could have held up a little bit better, we might be talking about a legendary career as opposed to just a very, very good one. One of the best cruiserweights ever. I think the only thing that really holds him back is just that he didn't get that real that real run at heavyweight where he went and beat one of the top guys at the time, which was Vladimir and Vitaly Klitschko. Hrgović, I actually remember when David Haye was having his camp for Tyson Fury, Hrgović was one of the sparring partners, and I think Hrgović is exactly the sort of stature that David Haye would have had troubles with. Tall, long, has a good jab, has a good right hand, but David Haye was hard to hit. He was very, very elusive, and he punched very, very hard. And Hrgović is very hittable, but his chin is excellent. I think that David Haye would have won that fight by late stoppage, but I think he might have got knocked down in the process. I think he might have got a little bit bust up in the process. Hrgović has a dodgy gas tank himself. It's a difficult one. It's actually not a straightforward one. And with any of these fights, I always caveat my heavyweight breakdowns by saying anything can happen in a heavyweight fight. It takes one shot. But I'm going to go for David Haye with that in mind. Next up, Joe Joyce against Riddick Bowe. Again, I think about prime Joe Joyce and the punishment he could take. He was a good fighter. And he had a good jab, and he beat Daniel Dubois when Daniel Dubois was still young and fresh. But I am going to go for Riddick Bowe here. Again, he's not a fighter that I've watched loads of, but I've watched enough of to say that I think that he had a comparable stature to Joe Joyce. I think he was about 6'5", Bowe. Big for the time. Well, I mean, I say big for the time. We've had some big heavyweights, but this is the era where they're really big on average. And obviously we have Usyk right now, who's the champion, who's smaller than most of them. But so maybe size doesn't count for too much. But I think Bowe, similar stature. I just think he had better hands, better speed. I think he was just a better boxer than Joyce. I think that Joyce would have absorbed a lot of punishment in that fight. I'm talking prime Joe Joyce. But I think Bowe might have won on points or even got a late stoppage. So I'm going for Riddick Bowe in that one. Finally, in the first half of the table, we've got Vitaly Klitschko against Pulev. And that is a very, very easy one for me. It's Vitaly Klitschko all day. He was a very, very good heavyweight, Vitaly Klitschko. And he was an absolute nasty piece of work in the ring. Very, very nearly beat Lennox Lewis if it wasn't for cuts. I know it was a slightly, what can we say? A Lennox Lewis who hadn't taken training camp too seriously. I remember he was, I believe he was making a movie before that fight or something. So Lennox Lewis wasn't in his prime shape for that fight. It was his last fight before he retired as well. But Vitaly Klitschko was a bad, bad man. And a fight between him and Vladimir in that era would have been very interesting. I don't actually know who I would pick. But Vitaly Klitschko, great fighter. Pulev was okay. He was a contender. He never won a heavyweight title or a full version of a heavyweight title. Was in the mix in that era, did well. But for me, Vitaly Klitschko all day. Moving into the second half of the table. First up, we've got an absolute barnstormer of a fight. We've got Oleksandr Usyk against George Foreman. Now, that is a very difficult fight for me to say. I mean, firstly, what George Foreman are we talking about? Are we talking about the original George Foreman or are we talking about the comeback George Foreman? You've got to say that the original was probably a better fighter. The original probably would have beaten the comeback one, but Foreman had amazing longevity, definitely has legendary status in the game because of what he was able to do. And honestly, I think it is quite a straightforward one when I really think about it, but it would be an amazing fight. I'd go for Usyk all day. I think Usyk would school George Foreman in a fight. And I know that sounds harsh. I think Foreman would have his moments, but to me, Usyk is up there with the very, very best fighters we've seen at cruiserweight and at heavyweight. He's amazing. Feet are just incredible. And I think he'll go far in this bracket. So Usyk, for me, beats George Foreman. Although we have to say, George Foreman would have got far if he hadn't been drawn against someone like Usyk in round one. I will say, though, that he definitely would have knocked him out. I don't think there's any chance Usyk would have knocked out George Foreman. I think Foreman would have gone the distance, and Usyk would have taken a majority points decision or a unanimous decision. Next up, this is a really interesting one. When this one popped out, I thought, wow, Deontay Wilder against Nikolai Valuev. It's a really interesting fight because Valuev was absolutely huge, and Wilder is a very, very mediocre boxer, but he has that touch of death. I think Wilder's got very lucky, much like throughout his entire career, soft touches, and I think of all the guys I've put on this list, it's one of the ones that definitely gets Wilder for round one, I'll say that. So he's had a soft touch here, Wilder, but I think Wilder would have hit Valuev, and I think he would have knocked him out. Or at the very least, he would have hurt him to the point where he went on to win a wide points decision. We know that Wilder had low output. I mean, the one thing I would say is looking at the fight with David Haye has much, much better defense than Deontay Wilder. And perhaps Valuev could have walked Wilder down, but because that's the question, could Wilder actually have knocked him out? He was so big and so tough, so powerful, a huge, thick skull. He had that crazy hair on his back and he looked like a freaking beast. So potentially Valuev could have walked him down and got to him at some point, but I think that Wilder would have actually knocked him out. I think that's probably what would have happened. And if he hadn't, he might have won a points decision. Regardless, we'll go for Wilder because Valuev wasn't a great boxer. Next up, Andy Ruiz Jr. against Evander Holyfield. And I actually think a prime Ruiz Jr. is a good fighter. Very good heavyweight boxer. But Evander Holyfield, we're talking legendary status here. One of the best to ever do it. Similarly with, to David Haye, to Usyk, one of those guys that came up from cruiser, went and won his titles at heavyweight, and mixed it with the very, very best. So I think Holyfield out of this list is probably the one who's all wrong for Ruiz Jr. I don't think Ruiz Jr. against Holyfield would have been able to get anything off, really, because Holyfield, just that inside space was his zone. It was his territory. It was his domain. And I think he would have been in closer for a reason. I think he would have really, really bossed him up. And just the cardio he had as well, Holyfield, the stamina, I think he would have taken Ruiz out after 6 at some point. So we're going Holyfield there. I'm quite confident in that pick. Although Ruiz had good hand speed, so maybe he would have given Evander some trouble. I think Evander would have got to him eventually. Next up, we've got Zhang. Zhilei Zhang against Lennox Lewis. Again, only one winner for me. And of course, with Zhang, you've always got the factor of that one shot. We saw it happen to Lewis a couple times in his career against Oliver McCall and against Hasim Rahman, where he had those KO defeats that he went back and redeemed and, you know, showed that he was the better boxer and took those guys out. So for me, even if there's 10, say there was 10 fights between these two, Zhang might ice Lewis in 1 or 2 of them. But ultimately, Lewis is the better boxer. He's the more complete fighter, the better gas tank, everything, better defense, better jab. And so for me, Lennox Lewis would beat Zhilei Zhang, I think, by knockout. I don't know what point, but I think that would happen. Next up, Fury against Bermane Stiverne. Tyson Fury, this is against Bermane Stiverne. And again, a very, very easy touch for Tyson Fury. You could argue that there's other heavyweights that should be in this list ahead of Stiverne who'd never had titles, who were just contenders. But Stiverne did have a belt at one point, so we'll go with Stiverne in the list. I've gone with Stiverne in the list, sorry. And I think Fury would just absolutely destroy Bermane Stiverne. I think it would be such an easy fight for him. If you go and watch that Derek Chisora trilogy, I think it would look something like the second and third fights in that trilogy, just piecing him up from the outside, staying boxing at range, switching from orthodox and southpaw. And I think that is one of the easiest calls in this list so far. Tyson Fury would easily beat Bermane Stiverne. Up next, an all-British clash, and I was delighted when this one was thrown out. Anthony Joshua against Frank Bruno. A lot of times in his career, AJ's been compared to Frank Bruno. And I think they're more different than that. And I actually think AJ's a better boxer than Frank Bruno was. Bruno was good, don't get me wrong. He had a belt, and he did well in his career. But for me, Anthony Joshua, I just think that the prime AJ, the one that didn't mind mixing it, I think he would have taken Bruno out. Bruno had a similar issue where he would gas. Had that thick set frame, the muscles, he was quite stiff. And I think that whilst it would have been a good scrap while it lasted, I think that AJ would take him out. Maybe take a few shots in the process. It'd be a war, it'd be a really good fight. But I fancy AJ there. Next up, Povetkin against Bakole. Against Marta Bakole. Sorry, my handwriting's a little bit smaller. So, Oleksandr Povetkin against Marta Bakole. That's a tough one, you know. Prime Povetkin was an absolute beast. He was such a good fighter. And he only came unstuck really against Vlad. And then when he was in his prime, I mean, later on he obviously lost to AJ, lost to Dylan White. But Prime Povetkin, I don't remember what that drug was they were all using. Was it clenbuterol or something like that? They were all on before it was banned. And his cardio significantly dropped, strangely enough. But Povetkin was an absolute beast, a great inside fighter, had a beautiful uppercut, beautiful bent arm shots, really powerful puncher. Bakole, on the other hand, looks like the absolute bogeyman right now in this division. And I really, really rate him. But to be honest with you, I think Povetkin might be the exact style that's all wrong for someone like Bakole. That's such a difficult one, man. I want to put Bakole further, but I think I've got to go with Povetkin there based on the style matchup. And you know, guys, this is the pain of the way the draw's gone. There's some guys that would have gone through the first round if they'd been matched against other fighters, but this is just the way that's gone. And I think Povetkin would get to Bakole, I do. And lastly, we've got Vladimir Klitschko against Fabio Wardley, who has only just become a top 10 heavyweight with the Ring Magazine rankings. A lot of people would fancy other guys above him, including Moses Atama, including Justice Huni. So I've not actually watched him yet, by the way. But anyway, there's a lot of guys who would be above him, but he is the Ring Magazine top 10 right now. He's had that devastating knockout win, so I chucked him in there to make up the numbers. And I think that without much debate, Vladimir Klitschko would very, very easily win that fight. Vladimir down as a legend as well. Get in the comments below. Do you think Vladimir deserves legendary status, or do you think he should be in there with the likes of David Haye and his brother Vitaly? Okay, so that's round 1 done. Let's go into round 2. So next up, we have Muhammad Ali against Joe Frazier. I think that prime, that very, very best Muhammad Ali does beat Joe Frazier. That's what I believe. As good as Joe Frazier was, he was a magnificent fighter, and even though he was small by today's standards, I'd put him in there with a lot of the big guys today, and I think he'd beat them. I do. I think he was fantastic. And I think he beats a lot of really good boxers in this list, but I'm going to go with Muhammad Ali. Next up, Daniel Dubois against Tommy Morrison. Again, this is quite straightforward for me. I think Daniel Dubois would beat Tommy Morrison. Again, I'm not someone who's watched loads of Tommy Morrison, but from what I have seen, I think Dubois would have had too much for him, and I don't think Morrison has a win on his record, again, that's better than Dubois. Whereas I think arguably Dubois has beaten guys who are at least as good as Morrison. So I'm going to go with Daniel Dubois in that fight. Next up, we've got Mike Tyson against David Haye. I wish this one hadn't come up so early, you know, like I don't actually really support any fighters these days. I kind of just enjoy watching the boxing and being objective and all that, but I do have that little gap in my heart for David Haye because of how he made me feel about boxing when I was younger. And Mike Tyson, of course, an absolute beast, someone that David Haye would have looked up to for sure. I think he said that, and a brilliant fighter. So, honestly, it's quite an easy call for me. It's Mike Tyson, but just because I think there were similarities in their styles, but Tyson, the more natural heavyweight, and we're talking prime for prime here. Of course, David Haye could have landed something, but it was the big guys with the long jabs that I think Tyson had issues with. I think Tyson would have got to Haye quite easily. I think he would have got close. David Haye might have landed a shot here or there, you know, and David Haye might have won a fight against Tyson, but I think on average, Tyson wins that matchup. His head movement was so good. I just view him as, while they were stylistically different, they had similar attributes. Tyson was more of a bob and counter punch and weave and had more volume than Haye, I think. But David Haye, he did have fantastic power. But again, Tyson, the more natural heavyweight, I think Tyson would have won that fight. But again, that's a hard one, you know. It's just, I didn't think that would be such a hard one. I thought that, because I'm sitting here doubting myself now. I'm like, could Haye have knocked out Tyson? I think possibly, but just not on average. I think Mike Tyson wins more than he loses against David Haye. Ooh, next up, Big Daddy Bo against Vitaly Klitschko. That is a difficult one, you know. Let me pull up Vitaly's record because I'm going to need some help here to make my decision. Vitaly Klitschko. I mean, I think that is one that is. I think either man could have won that one. That is very, very difficult. So Vitaly obviously had losses to Lennox Lewis and Chris Bird. But a lot of good wins. It was a weaker era for the heavyweights, I will say that. So arguably, Bo has got the better wins on his record. Let's have a look at Bo's record. So Bo only with one defeat. That was coming against Evander Holyfield, which he obviously got back. He redeemed that loss. But outside of that, I mean, Bo has quite an interesting record. I mean, I'm not super well versed on this era of heavyweights. I don't recognize a lot of the names that he fought. So, and I know that there was all that chat about him ducking Lennox Lewis and never making that fight when he could have. It's a difficult one. It really is. Where do I go with that one? I think I'm going to go with Vitaly. And I know more about Vitaly, so that's definitely factoring into it. I will be completely honest here. If those of you that are fans of Vitaly Klitschko, fans of Big Daddy Bo, let me know who you think would have won that fight. I'm going Vitaly. I think it's a genuine 50-50. I think that's a very difficult one. I've watched Bo, I've watched Vitaly, but then, you know, you don't have the context a lot of the time, so it's hard to kind of really understand what's going on. I liked Bo a lot. I just think Vitaly was nasty, and I think he would have really done well in any era, so I'm going to go Vitaly, but that is a really, really tough one to choose, so we'll go Vitaly there. Okay, next up, we've got Usyk against Wilder, and I can make very short work of this one. We're going to go Usyk. Wilder not good enough to live with Usyk. Wilder always has that one-punch opportunity, but Usyk's got a great chin. Usyk's got amazing feet. Usyk would have bust Wilder up over 12 rounds. I mean, he would have hit him so much. Probably would have stopped him, I reckon. So Usyk there. Quite an easy one for me. Next up, Holyfield against Lewis. Right. Holyfield against Lewis. Well, we saw it, didn't we? And Lennox Lewis won this fight, but it's not a fresh Evander Holyfield. So I'm going to go Lewis because I think Lewis is one of the very, very best to ever do it. And he's right in the conversation all the way to the end in this one. So Lennox Lewis would beat Evander Holyfield in my opinion. However, it's not straightforward. It's not straightforward. Holyfield was great, but I think Lewis was one of the best at the right style to beat Holyfield. So we're going to go Lennox Lewis there. Next up, Fury and AJ. A fight we're all kind of hoping to see, but it's kind of lost its allure, hasn't it? It's not the same anymore. The only way it can regain it is if AJ takes the Dubois rematch and wins and Fury beats Usyk, then it's on big time, but I really don't see that being what will happen. We've got two amazing guys in the mix in there with them in Dubois and Usyk who are likely better and almost certainly better. So I think that prime for prime, I think you say Fury wins. There was a period where I was starting to feel like AJ would have won based on who had slid more and whatnot, but I think Fury just would have outboxed him, basically. I think he's too smart, too tricky. His jab's too good. His defense isn't great, Fury, but... And in that respect, you know, AJ may have got to him, may have gone into Super Saiyan mode. But if we're talking prime for prime, I think Fury finds a way through that fight and gets the win. So we'll go Fury there. And finally, in this category, Povetkin against Vlad. Do you know what, guys? That's one of the easiest ones of the day because we've actually seen that fight and Vladimir Klitschko won that. So Vladimir Klitschko gets the call there. Up next, Muhammad Ali against Daniel Dubois. And again, a very easy one. Muhammad Ali is an elite world-class, greatest of all time level fighter. Daniel Dubois, while he's very good, is a good heavyweight, is progressing all the time. I think he's still going to get better and better. And, you know, a good heavyweight champion right now, Muhammad Ali wins that one. I don't need to go into too much detail with that one, I don't think. I think Muhammad Ali would have absolutely schooled Daniel Dubois. And people talk about the size difference and whatnot, but look at Usyk, look what he did to Dubois, look what he is doing. He's fully debunking that idea that only these massive guys can win these fights. Up next, in our second quarterfinal, we have Tyson against Vitaly Klitschko. And prime for prime, once again, Mike Tyson wins that one for me. I think that, again, Vitaly could have actually done quite well against Tyson, could have boxed well. But this is prime Mike Tyson we're talking about, and I think Mike Tyson would have got to Vitaly and taken him out. But it'd have been a good fight. And I'm not like... I think, again, if you take 10 of them, maybe Vitaly wins a couple. But we're talking prime for prime, that absolute best Mike Tyson. So that's going to set up an Ali Tyson semi-final in Category 1, which is a tantalizing fight, which I'll come back to in a moment. So in the next quarterfinal, we've got Usyk against Lennox Lewis. Oh my God, that is so difficult. Oh, man. So the first thing to say is we've seen Usyk deal with big, long, tall boxers now at heavyweight who can punch. That's the first thing to say. He dealt with Dubois. He's dealt with Fury. He's dealt with AJ. But none of them are as good as Lennox Lewis, in my opinion. We're talking prime for prime here. None of them are as good as Lennox Lewis. But Usyk won those fights well. I mean, he won them really well. Lewis, on the other hand, the closest thing to Usyk he fought was probably, you know, he fought Tyson, he fought Holyfield, but they were both diminished versions. So it's hard to know how he would have gotten against them in their absolute prime. And equally, a lot of the fights he lost were one-shotters where he just got iced. Well, that was all the fights he lost. So it's a really, really tough one. And I think Lewis would have had just the style to do it. But I also think Usyk is absolutely amazing. Oh my God, I don't know. Guys, get in the comments below. Who would you have gone for, Usyk or Lewis? I'm going to have to flip a coin. Have I got a coin? I do. Right, I'm going to flip... I'm sorry, I'm going to flip a coin for this one. I don't know if this is allowed, but I make the rules, so right. Okay, heads. I'm going to go Lewis. Tails, I'm going to go Usyk. It's tails. Usyk's through. Right. I can't believe I've just done that. That's wild. All right, yeah, get in the comments below. Who wins that for you, Lewis or Usyk? Next up, Fury against Vlad. Again, we saw it. It wasn't probably the absolute prime Vlad, but it was a very, very good Vlad. A very, very good Vlad. And so I'm going to say Fury wins that. I mean, maybe if they go against each other 10 times, maybe it's 50-50. But I've got to say Tyson Fury. Because as I say, we've seen it. So the semi-final is Ali against Tyson and Usyk against Fury. So we've got two absolute legends against two guys who are fighting each other in December, which is quite hilarious. So you're going to get a little early prediction here from how I'm feeling that fight is going to go. So anyway, we'll do Ali and Tyson first. This is almost impossible to predict, and I want to flip the coin again, but I'll try and actually make a pick for this one. So, prime for prime. Tyson was absolutely destructive, incredible puncher, amazing style, amazing head movement. I don't doubt that he would have hurt Ali and got to him. But equally, Ali would have made it very, very difficult for him while scoring points with his jab. Ali had the speed and the footwork to keep Tyson at bay. Ali had the toughness to not get knocked out by Tyson. He had the gas tank to go the full distance, where even prime Tyson, we don't really know if he could have done that. So, with Ali, I mean. So I'm going to go Muhammad Ali. And I know it sounded like a straightforward decision. It's not. Again, Tyson could have won that fight. But I'm going Muhammad Ali. So he is in the final. Our first finalist is there. And in our second semi-final, Usyk against Fury. Usyk's already beaten Fury. Again, it sounds straightforward. It's not, because I think Fury can win that fight. And we're talking prime Fury here. We're talking the Fury that beat Vlad. We're talking the Fury that could have been if he hadn't gone and destroyed his body for 2 years and then come back. Potentially talking the Fury in the second Wilder fight, but I think maybe somewhere between that guy and the guy who beat Vlad, there was an even better version we never got to see. But that's pure fantasy. So I mean, all of this is. But you know what I'm saying? We're trying to draw from facts and what we know some realistic outcomes in this fantasy. So I'm going for Usyk because he's already beaten Fury, a good Fury. Would he have beaten the prime Fury? It might have been quite a bit closer, but I actually didn't think that fight was super close, competitive, but ultimately Usyk won. So I'm going Usyk. So our final is Muhammad Ali against Oleksandr Usyk. And that is a disgusting fight. And again, I'm not going to flip the coin. I'm going to pick a winner. And I think I know who wins. I think I know who I'm going to pick. And it's Muhammad Ali. It's Muhammad Ali. And it's funny because whenever someone says Muhammad Ali is the greatest of all time, you kind of stop and go, is that just because of what he did outside the ring, because of what he stood for, the way he came back and fought, won fights he was the underdog in, etc., you know, using smarts rather than being the better boxer necessarily, or better fighter. But ultimately, I think Usyk's shown us that if you're a really, really talented, skilled heavyweight, you can still compete with those big guys. And I think that Ali was magnificent. I think his foot speed was incredible. His hand speed was incredible. And I think it would have been very, very close. But I think that Ali has the athletic edge over Usyk in terms of his hand speed. And I think his foot speed was also better. As amazing as Usyk is and the puzzle that Usyk is, I think Ali would have won that fight. I think it would have been a points win. I don't think it would have been a knockout. But I think Muhammad Ali would have beaten Usyk. And that is mad to say. But it would have been an amazing fight. Can you imagine if those two existed in the same era? But yeah, so my winner of the Heavyweight Madness bracket tournament is Muhammad Ali. Guys, please get in the comments below. Let me know if you've enjoyed this kind of video. And if you want me to do another weight, I'd be very happy to do so if you've enjoyed this and you think it's worth it. So maybe I could do the welterweights next. I love welterweight, the history in welterweight. So let me know what you think about that. Bang a like on the video if you've enjoyed it. Subscribe to a guy called Henry and get your comments in the comment section below. Where did I get this wrong? Who do you think would have won these fights? It's all a bit of fun. It's all a bit fancy. But as always, guys, I hope you've enjoyed this video and on to the next one.